And what's fascinating is these internal barriers that are, habits and manifest as habits and behaviors. Really, most of them are rooted in women's strengths, and they are responsible early in our careers for helping us to survive and thrive.
You're listening to The Successful Bookkeeper with your host, Michael Palmer. Listen each week as inspiring guests share their secrets of success to help you increase your confidence, work smarter, and build a business you love. This episode of The Successful Bookkeeper is brought to you by PureBookkeeping.com, the proven system to grow your bookkeeping business.
Welcome back to the Successful Bookkeeper Podcast. I am your host, Michael Palmer, and today's show is going to be a fantastic one. Our guest is a world-class expert on women's leadership, best-selling author of the book, How Women Rise, a speaker and a leadership coach, Sally Helgesen. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
It's great to have you, and what an amazing career it seems you've had. I mean, you are the world's premier expert on women's leadership, cited by Forbes. I mean, it's remarkable. I'd love to hear your career journey leading up to this point so our listeners know who you are.
Well, my career journey has been a long one. I've been around for a while. I had about 20 years working as a journalist and in corporate communications. And then in 1990, I wrote a book called The Female Advantage, Women's Ways of Leadership, which I'm really proud to say was the first book that focused on what women had to contribute as leaders rather than how they needed to change and adapt. It came directly out of the experience I'd had in corporate communications, seeing how the organizations I worked with, although they were excellent, had really very little idea of what women had to contribute as leaders. So that book, I think being the first one to take that point of view, became very popular, and I started getting calls from companies and universities and associations and partnership firms and asking if I could deliver programs, keynotes, workshops, etc. That was in 1990, so I just said, well, I could be writing my own speeches instead of writing them for executives. I think I'll give this a shot. And the last 30 years have really been focused on women's leadership and building more inclusive organizations. I've written 6 more books in the field, and just spent the last 30 years pretty much traveling around the world and doing programs.
That's remarkable. Congratulations on your journey. I'm always curious, in terms of your journey, building yourself up to be a leader in this space, what were the obstacles that you faced?
Oh, boy, did I face some obstacles. First, I think that this kind of journey is a very lonely one. You're a one-person shop. Until about 3 or 4 years ago, I really was a one-person shop. Now I have a bit of a team behind me. It's mostly subcontractors. But it was dealing with that loneliness, with that isolation. It was hard to meet other colleagues, people who were doing what I was doing. That was tough. There were certainly financial ups and downs. I had some big success in the first 7 or 8 years, and then I had a couple books from, say, 97 up through 2005 that did not do very well, and it was hard to get bookings, and I had, some plans that derailed. It was a very different time in terms of technology, so it was hard to get attention unless a magazine wrote a profile of your book. Now we have many more options for marketing, and it was pretty tough, and then the recession hit, like with many independent workers. The recession for me and for my husband as well was very, very challenging. And so I had to some degree, financially rebuild from that. So it has not been a smooth path, but it is a very compelling subject. And watching women evolve and their faith in their own leadership and their leadership skills evolve over the last 30 years is really what's kept me going.
We'll get back to the interview in just a few moments, but right now, here's a quick message from our sponsor. Let me ask you a question. Are you frustrated with how long it takes to get stuff in your bookkeeping business, or with how chaotic or confusing things seem to be? Well then, let me tell you about a much better way of getting work done by using an amazing tool that will help you overcome the frustrating log jams in your bookkeeping business. Sweet Process is a simple but powerful solution that lets you create clear, step-by-step instructions for every task in your bookkeeping business, from new client onboarding to executing client work to responding to client requests. So everything gets done more easily and reliably. Plus, you'll have a central place where everyone who works with you, your employees, contractors, and even virtual assistants, can access your procedures anytime from any device. The best way to understand how Sweet Process streamlines your work is to start using it. The company offers a 14-day free trial, but as a loyal listener of this podcast, you can try it for 28 days free of charge. You don't even have to enter your credit card to get started. Just go to sweetprocess.com/successful bookkeeper to begin your free 28-day trial today. Thank you for taking the time to hear from our sponsor. Now let's get back to the interview. It is an interesting story in that you are this woman that's working to bring a leadership knowledge and inspiration and empowerment to women leaders, and you are a woman yourself, and you are working alone. And I would imagine many people would think that it's the opposite of what your experience was. You know, you're a person writing these books, and you're on stage with people, and you're, out there, and yet here you are, you were this for a very long time, a person on your own. And I would think many of our listeners would identify with that. They're small business owners. They're doing this business on their own. They're alone often, and whether you're female or male, you're going to experience the loneliness that can come with growing your own enterprise.
Yes, it is. It's a very tough thing, and it looks good outside. But here's how I often felt. I felt like I flew in. I was on stage. I had 300 people. They were excited, usually. I mean, sometimes you don't do a great job, but they were generally very excited and complimentary. And then I flew off, and they got to hang out together in their company. Right. They got to be together, and I had to go on to the next place. And so that was the tough part. And I guess it was a little tougher because it didn't look that way on the outside, because there were a lot of accolades, and you get to be to some degree a rock star when you're living that way. That people look at it and it looks one way, but it has the loneliness of the solo entrepreneur. And one thing I learned the hard way is the most important thing you can do is to get connected with a group of colleagues, stay connected, find a way to build that support for yourself, even when you think you don't have time.
Really one of the most critical things is to get with other people before everything else. It sounds was that something that you knew to do, or did you find that through happenstance?
It was really happenstance. A colleague who has been very important in my life and was the co-author of my most recent book, Marshall Goldsmith, is top-ranked global executive coach. In 1995, he had an aha that he felt this kind of loneliness and lack of colleague network, and he was doing extremely well. And I happened to meet him. We were co-presenting at a big leadership event out in San Diego. And the next year he called me and he said, I'm forming a small group of colleagues to be a support network for one another, and we're getting together in La Jolla, a nice place to go in January. And I'd like you to be part of it. And it was a big decision for me, and it was all self-funding. And I thought, geez, I don't know what I'm doing here. But I flew out, and that network has stayed together now for, we're in our 26th year. And, that was instrumental for me, is just having that support, being with other people who were they were all leadership coaches and writers and experts. And being part of that was so important for me.
So I'm glad you brought that up. It's I was recently having a conversation with, in Canada here, we have an association called the Certified Professional Bookkeepers of Canada. And it just reminded me when we were talking about the importance of the community. And I know that there's many listeners who are members of that community. They found it early in their career, and it literally, if I asked somebody, what helped you get through all of it, it would be something along those lines. And the CPB for many has been this connection to these other people who are doing similar things, going in a similar path, but it creates this bond and support network for bookkeepers that is essential.
It's so important. And now, I do a lot of coaching, and it's something I require of all my coachees. You're the head of an association. You're an executive at an association. Join the Association of Association Executives and get active in it. No matter how little time you think you have, no matter how you're struggling meeting the demands of balancing a family and work, it is the most important thing you can do for yourself, because struggling with that aloneness and that's inherent in being a business owner is significant. And I don't want to overstate it. I don't want to make it sound like it's a big psychological imperative, but it's an imperative for success, for confidence, for building your profile, really for assuming the kind of leadership that is always important in a long-term successful career.
I echo it. I believe what you're saying is 100% accurate, and we've talked about it many times on the podcast. And it's the one barrier that I think many will put up is the time. It's like, I don't have the time, or maybe even the cost, of it. Maybe there's an investment that needs to be made. But I think both of us can stress the difference this will make in one's life is unmeasurable, unimaginable, and miraculous. So if you want some of that, you know where to get it.
Yeah, exactly. And if this year is terrible, if you've got, twin 2-year-olds, okay, fine. But if then do it next year. But make a commitment that you're going to do it, and do it for yourself, because it's I felt that. I mean, I remember getting on that plane. I can still remember being at Kennedy and flying out to stay with at this very fancy hotel at my own expense for 5 days with absolutely no idea of what I was doing. And I thought, what am I doing? I should be home working.
And 26 years later, it's been
one
of the most important things you've done.
Yeah.
So cool. Yeah. So cool. So important. I'm glad that that came up. Now, I'm curious, you focused on specializing in women leadership, and you've told a little bit about how that came to be. I'd love to hear how you've seen like some of the key fundamentals of what needs to be identified or tackled by our female listeners to rise. I mean, they're not rising in a workplace per se; they're rising in their own business, and I would imagine there's many parallels there.
Definitely. They're rising in their own business, they're rising in their own profession. And in my experience in 30 years, there are two things. First of all, it goes to strengths and challenges. And in terms of strengths, it's really important to be aware of and identify and be able to clearly articulate what your strengths are as a professional, as a business owner. And those are two slightly different things. As a professional, that's the profession of bookkeeping. But as a business owner, that's to some degree a different, though complementary set of skills. So you want to be really clear about what is that one thing or three things. Those are the two best ways to frame it, that are your exceptional strengths. And you want to keep that in mind, and you want to find a way to always emphasize that, to believe in it, If you feel uncomfortable articulating it, enlist a friend and say, you know what, I'm going to call you up every single day and I'm going to tell you what my strengths are until I get comfortable saying it. Because, you don't really feel comfortable saying it until you've said it aloud a lot. So that's one thing. I think you want to be aware of those strengths. And one of the greatest things that I've watched over these 30 years, and, again, one of the things that's kept me engaged is I've seen that a lot of the strengths that women have for building strong relationships, for direct communication rather than, trying to be very hierarchical in how they communicate, for understanding and having empathy with client and customer issues. A lot of those strengths have been, when I started in 1990, those were seen as soft skills, not as leadership skills. And they are seen as leadership skills today. And so having a sense of what your strengths are and how they position you as a leader or potential leader, that's one thing that's key. And then the other thing is also being very clear about what those internal barriers are that may be holding you back, whether it's a lack of confidence, discomfort in speaking about what you have to contribute, putting off the enlistment of allies in a network while you just focus on getting your work done. Identify those those internal barriers, and then get a great marketing plan.
Love it. Let's talk a little bit about those barriers. You listed them pretty quickly.
Yes.
It's interesting that you've mentioned it, and I sort of was trailing off a little bit in my mind as you gave us a pretty big nugget there around the fact that women and their sort of, and I don't want to misspeak, but their strengths, the general strengths that we could say women have, are very applicable to many of the most important things in leadership and business development and growth. And I was thinking about my wife, who has said many times that the world wouldn't have so many problems if we had more female leaders, which I agree with her 100%, just looking at how she runs our household and how she runs her life and how she runs and manages children. There's all of these leadership qualities that are just there, but it hasn't always been that way in terms of women having and being acknowledged as being these leaders. And that was where I was going with that. And then you started talking about the barriers of the weaknesses per se. Let's go through those again, because I think it's exciting for the strengths, but it's really we got to make sure we're paying attention to some of these barriers. They're big.
Oh yeah, they're big, and that's really what I've always focused on, women's strengths. But in How Women Rise, my most recent book, the one I co-authored with Marshall, which I have to say this week has now gone into its 19th language with Norwegian. Yeah, quite something. But in How Women Rise, that is looking specifically at the habits and behaviors most likely to get in the way of successful women as they seek to move forward in their careers. And what's fascinating is these internal barriers that are, habits and manifest as habits and behaviors. Really, most of them are rooted in women's strengths, and they are responsible early in our careers for helping us to survive and thrive. But at a certain point, as we try to move to a higher level in our careers, assume more leadership, whether it's as an independent business owner, whether it's as part of a larger business, it's good to have an awareness. And in How Women Rise, we identify 12 habits, and these are habits that I've been aware of for decades in the work I've done with women. And Marshall had written a very successful big book called What Got You Here Won't Get You There. And it was about the habits that internal barriers that hold back successful people. But he was drawing on his coaching base, which is about 85% men. So he had all this kind of stuff in there, like learn to apologize, et cetera, which wasn't very applicable. Mm-hmm. So I suggested that we collaborate and look at. So we have 12 habits in that book that are really often problematic for women, and I'm glad to talk about a number of them if you think that would be helpful to your listeners.
And I just want to make a point. I love the title of the book, How Women Rise. I mean, any woman that is looking to rise above wherever they're at in any industry or profession, it sounds like this would be a book that they would want to read. I mean, it's specifically for them.
Yeah, and I think that's the reason it's really been sort of a global phenomenon, because it's very tactical and very practical. So some of the habits include, reluctance to claim your achievements. Here's a big one: expecting others to spontaneously notice and value your contributions. Overvaluing expertise, which is one of the ones that gets us into trouble in terms of, building the visibility and the relationships that will support us over time. Another one, two others in that arena are failing to engage allies from the start, and building rather than leveraging relationships, which is a big one, although for business owners, it's so difficult to run a successful business unless you develop the capacity to be able to leverage relationships, that usually you either get that dealt with or you really struggle. Perfectionism, of course, the perfection trap is one of them. Disease to please. A couple of communication behaviors. Minimizing is a big one. This will only take 1 minute, or I just have one thing to say, so that you're sort of proactively discounting what you're going to be talking about. Rumination. Those are, maybe 8 of the 12, but they're very foundational, and it's so interesting. I was people resonate with them. I was signing some books. I'd gotten a bunch of books, 400, right before the lockdown, in March 2020, and I was out in a beautiful hotel in San Diego, and they delivered the books for the client the next day to my hotel, so I had 400 books to sign. I didn't want to be in my room, so I had them bring them down to the lobby and in front of a fireplace, one of these great California type places. And as I sat there signing books, and nobody from the event was staying in the hotel. It was, it was an event that people lived there. I had 3 people walk by and come up to me and say, "Oh, I have 3 habits in that book. I have 9 habits in that book. Oh, that book, I have 12 of those habits." So the amazingness, when I did the media tour in Japan, the response was, "We thought these were only habits for Japanese women." So those habits are very, very resonant, and they're widespread, and we see them at junior levels, but we also see them at really senior leadership levels and among successful entrepreneurs and business owners. So there's a lot of tactical information in the book about how to address some of these habits.
I absolutely love that. I think it's empowering just from that perspective, in that to know thyself. I think they say to know oneself is the next thing to godliness, and this is another level of that. And for those that maybe haven't taken that approach or gone down that journey, is to understand this is not just a national thing. It's part of the characteristics and traits that's global or universal for women.
That's been the amazing thing, that we have this. That it's been resonant from Korea, Russia, Iran, Israel, Turkey, as well as, European countries, Brazil. It was a bestseller there. So that has been, people often say, what was your biggest surprise with the book? I would say it was the global resonance. Although, on the other hand, I've been working around the world for 30 years, so... And, it's really drawn from the habits that I've learned about in doing, particularly workshops and coaching.
Mm. So, people reading the book, I'd love to hear some of the stories. They talk about having the habits in the book. What have you heard from people saying, how did it make a difference for them?
In terms of identifying those habits, I get those letters all the time. I got a email just recently from a young woman who she had found the book actually in the airport. This is, just before the shutdown, but she'd found the book in, I think it was the Denver airport, and she was flying to Chicago to meet with her boss. And she'd had a long experience of having meetings with her boss where she was trying to negotiate for some kind of raise and not getting it. And she said that when she read that habit about expecting others to spontaneously notice and value your contributions, she realized that she had consistently failed to talk about certain things that she was contributing because she was just assuming that people would know or should know. I hear that a lot. I believe if I do great work, people should notice. And so she read that chapter in the book. She said, I just put it down, and I spent the entire rest of the plane trip out there going to Chicago, writing down everything I could think of that had been really important that I'd done that had contributed to the success of our team in the year before. She said, and I went into that meeting with a level of preparation and confidence that I have never experienced. And she said it just turned things around for me in the organization, both in terms of how she was rewarded monetarily, but also she said she just saw herself as a contributor at a level that she had never seen herself because she had not bothered articulating it and had, again, expected that people would know. For example, she was really good at building certain relationships. So she was a go-to person who, a lot of clients came to asking other questions unrelated just to her job because they trusted her and knew she could connect them with other people.
It's a great story. I think one that many will identify with in that, from my perspective and the stories and the hundreds of bookkeepers that I've had conversations with, many of them feel frustrated by not being valued by their customers. And this is it. You've nailed it right here. They expect that they will go out of their way to identify the greatness that this bookkeeper or person has brought into their life. And guess what they're thinking about? They're not thinking about you. They're thinking about themselves. So if you're not willing to highlight the greatness you're bringing, you can't expect people to know this. I mean, that one habit right there could, not just from money, as you said, not just the money, but the sense of being able to identify what you've done that's valuable, know that you've communicated, know that someone has accepted and acknowledged that, yes, wow, you did those things. That in itself is worth its weight in gold.
And, it's so important to be able to do that because if you continue to feel undervalued or underrecognized as a professional, as a contributor in terms of your business, you will over time disengage from that. You will not be able to invest your full enthusiasm and passion in that work because over time, being under-recognized and undervalued makes us feel bad, and we can, spiral down. And, it's just that fundamental thing. Oh, I get it. It's just what you said. The clients, the customers, they're focused on their business. They're focused on what their issues are, what their problems are. And if you don't have that capacity to be able to, or that willingness really, to be able to highlight what it is you're contributing, what you're doing and what you can do, what you're capable of doing by developing, good examples and being willing to just step up and share that. Women are often, in my experience, they're worried that if they do that, they'll be seen as arrogant or aggressive or, all about me or whatever. And that always trying to manage other people's perceptions and putting that above being clear about what your contributions and your potential are is not a path to an extremely satisfactory career, because you're investing this energy in, well, I've got to make sure this person thinks I'm a wonderful person, instead of, my responsibility here to this person, especially as a business owner, is to be clear about what I'm contributing. If you can put that first instead of trying to manage perceptions, that's really going to give you a boost.
And I think the example is a wonderful formula for our listener, in that she wrote down all of the great things she'd done that were, specific to her boss's objectives, how she had helped her boss win, essentially. And that was, even just writing that, if she would have never shared it with her boss, would have been a value. That's like level 1. Level 2 is you've shared it. Level 3 is this person has acknowledged you now for it. And another level where I can't remember what level I'm at, but the level will be they're going to pay you more for it.
They're going to pay you more, and you're going to be more engaged, because you're going to feel more valued. So you're going to have that satisfaction, and feeling valued is very important, and it's often especially important to women. But you want to feel valued, not just because you're a wonderful person who never tries to make claims on anyone's attention. You want to feel valued as a professional who's really showing up and is telling the client implicitly, here, I can take care of you. I can take care of these problems for you. And you're so right. Just even if you only got to level 1, that's progress in itself. And I think that the practice of writing down, just keeping a little Word doc on your desktop, of writing down, what you did that was of value for an individual, because people often don't know. I know that, with my own accountant, I had no idea what he had done in terms of helping me get my, PPP, that payment we got as small business owners when the pandemic began, and we lost, all our business, which is what happened to me briefly. But I didn't realize what he'd done, but, he was very clear about spelling it out. He said, I think you need to know I did this, that, and the other. And, that's, I'm not thinking, oh, well, he's certainly arrogant to tell me that. I'm thinking, I'm glad I know. That's information I need to know. Oh, that's something I want to say, that treating what you contribute and what your potential is, if you can frame it in your mind as information that your clients and customers need, as opposed to, being all about me or whatever, then that's going to help you feel more comfortable in sharing it.
I agree. I think the way that you, example that you gave, the way it was framed was, I think you need to know this. I think it's value before you know this, and you weave in what you've done. It's going to be easier. And I think, more comfortable, perhaps. And I think it's context shift here is really clear to me. Is if you don't do this, you will eventually disengage, and you won't do as good a work as you might. Maybe you'll even quit. And that's not going to be great for your customers. That's the kind of interesting thing. The success of your customer depends on you making sure that they know how great you are in the work that you're doing and how it's valuable. Because if you don't, they're not going to value you. You're not going to feel valued. You're going to stop serving them, and they won't find as passionate a person as you likely are for the books and the business and helping that business owner be empowered around their finances. So they need to know this for the sake of their business. They need to know the work you're doing, the value that you're producing in order for them to be successful. And that's the context shift. And I really like how you've, positioned it as well as get it in their hands as something valuable for them to know, as in order for them to do their work.
That's exactly right. It's information. And by the way, keeping yourself engaged by positioning yourself well and getting those good responses. We all need these good responses. We all need this affirmation. And when we feel that, I have interviewed personally in the work I've done thousands of women who have left jobs that were really good jobs. And what I hear over and over, which is different from what, the story that they tell when they leave, is they never knew what I could do. They never understood what I could contribute. That's what impels them over time, over years, to get out of a job, of a career, of a profession. They never knew what I could do. You want to make sure you do everything you can to let them know so that doesn't happen to you.
Exactly. And I will say, this the males do not get off on this one either. This is a piece that I think many female would probably, as you've written in the book, is an area, and I've heard it time and time again, it's an area of opportunity, but it's also an area of opportunity for every one of our listeners. If you're not willing to share with others what you're doing that's good, great, or awesome, or whatever you want to call it, you can't expect others to know about it, consider it, or celebrate it, and that's on them. And so this is such a big opportunity for our listener to get more satisfaction, get paid more, get better clients referred to them. I mean, there's so many opportunities just on this one little habit that's out of your book, How Women Rise, which I think is. If that's number one, we've got 11 more to go that we could dig deep on. Of course, we don't have time to do that on this podcast, but that's what the book is for.
Yeah.
I'd love to share, before I let you go, I'd love to know, what are some of the resources that you have, if any, that our listener can get after? I mean, obviously getting your book, I'm sure it's everywhere that they buy books. They can get your book, How Women Rise, and we'll, of course, have links in the show to those. But there are other resources or things that you think our listeners should know about?
Sure. I mean, just in terms of my own work, I have a website, sallyhelgesen.com. I've got a lot of articles. I've got a lot of information there, and I'm active on LinkedIn. I love LinkedIn because nobody ever says anything negative about anybody, which I think is a very good thing for social media, and so that's where I'm active, and I have a newsletter, a LinkedIn newsletter, and I do a lot of posting and in a lot of conversations with people who enjoy this work and who gain benefit from it. So it's a way, to some degree, of being part of that community, and so that's a great thing.
That's beautiful. Well, I've had another great author on the show recently, Dr. Robert Cialdini, and he's a renowned expert in psychology of persuasion. You are the world's premier expert on women's leadership. I would love for our listener to buy your book. And what I'm going to offer is, if you go and buy How Women Rise, you send me the confirmation, some sort of proof that you've bought that book. I will send you my book, The Successful Bookkeeper, complimentary, of course, while supplies lasts, and all that good stuff, which is infinite. So, I will send that, and I shouldn't really. I think the bookkeeper should make sure that I don't offer this too many times, but I'm just compelled because I really do think this book is going to make a massive difference for our listener. And I think it's something that I want to encourage them to do that and buy this book and make a practice of getting information like this. This really can help leverage and lift up to make life go a lot easier. So if you do that, get the book. I'm going to send you a copy of my book for free in the mail, and I know it'll make a massive difference.
Well, thank you. That is a very generous offer. I'm extremely appreciative of that.
Beautiful. Well, Sally, it has been absolutely tremendous to have you on the show. And on behalf of our listener, I want to thank you for your generosity and being on the show and sharing a little bit of your knowledge with us today and experience on how our listeners can be successful in their business.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a great pleasure being with you, Michael.
Thank you. And with that, we wrap another episode of the Successful Bookkeeper podcast. To learn more about today's wonderful guest and to get access to all sorts of valuable free business building resources, you can go to thesuccessfulbookkeeper.com. Until next time, goodbye.
You've been listening to The Successful Bookkeeper with Michael Palmer. For more information and to download the resources mentioned in this episode, please visit us at thesuccessfulbookkeeper.com. Thank you for listening.